The White Dwarf is probably one of the most iconic icons in the Games Workshop repertoire. And for those of you that actually played the tabletop, I'm sure you're very familiar with the namesake magazine, the White Dwarf. It's been around for, it feels like hundreds of years, but it's been over 40 years the White Dwarf, both magazine and White Dwarf himself have kind of been in circulation. So today I want to talk about Grombrindal and his relationship with Malekith, as well as just his lore as a whole, as well as come to some of his features about his stats and his actual tabletop to Total War conversion. Now, there isn't an actual really cool lore blurb I can read for you guys from the 8th edition Dwarf book, because it doesn't exist. Grombrindal has never actually had an official place in any of the Warhammer books, army books. He's always just been a supplement from any of the White Dwarfs. In fact, he actually came about in White Dwarf number 348. That was his very first actual official rules that were published. Also in like White Dwarf 100, I think, was the first like actual telling of his story and the such. So he has a story that's been kind of been retconned and changed so many times over the years, but I'll go along with some of the things that I find to be the ones either I like the most or I think really is the most true, and not just Games Workshop retconning to change something all the way down the line like they have done with say the Eternity King with Malekith, but we'll get into that in a whole different video. So to tell the story of the White Dwarf, of Grombrindal, we have to tell the story of Snorri Whitebeard. Now, Snorri Whitebeard is the first and, well, eldest son of Grungi and Bullaiah, the elder god and goddess of the dwarfs. He's the very first actual High King, and he has this history dating back all the way to the time of Anarion. And during the big great catastrophe we've talked about before, where the chaos incursions happen and it wipes out a whole ton of stuff, and the dwarfs are fighting them, the High Lizardmen are fighting them, the High Elves are fighting them, and the Great Vortex is born. During that time, the ancient ancestor gods of the dwarves eventually leave, and when they do leave, the dwarfs appoint Snorri Whitebeard as the very first actual High King of the dwarfs. And this is pretty huge. You know, this is the first. This is the beginning of the monarchy of the Karazankor, as it's called. You know, the empire of dwarfdom. And at this time, the dwarfs don't actually have a huge relationship with the High Elves, or I'm sorry, the Elves in general, until the very end of the Great Catastrophe, where you've got Malekith teaming up with Snorri Whitebeard to kind of exact some vengeance and kill off some of the last of the Chaos armies that threaten kind of the old world as a whole. Now, this is where things kind of get a little bit dicey. In the original lore, I want to just say 4, 5, 6 edition maybe, Malekith becomes the ambassador to the dwarfs. He becomes a dwarf friend, as it's called in the Lord of the Rings, you know, an actual person who is, you know, basically a dwarf by namesake, not by blood. And through this, Malekith becomes this ambassador and this large figurehead of the dwarves, and he knows everything about their culture. He travels the world much like his father Anarion does, and he learns about all these different cultures and races, and he does a lot to strengthen that relationship between the dwarfs and the High Elves, something that to a level that it's never been ever since, and it never will be. But the lore kind of states that when Snorri Whitebeard is dying, he makes Malekith promise on his deathbed, an oath, as it is called, as you all know, that the dwarfs and the elves will always be friends, because they were apprehensive coming into it on both sides, and they only flourished, they only blossomed from their relationship. And Malekith took the oath and said, yeah, you know what? You're right. We'll always be best bros. We're always going to be like fisting, you know, pumping fists and drinking beers together and fancy elven wines and kind of looking each other in the eye and then winking suggestively. We'll always do that forever. You know, just a tip. And Snorri passes on into basically dwarf Valhalla with this oath intact, and happy with this oath intact. There's also a kind of a differentiation in the lore between that being Malekith, or that being King, the Phoenix King Belshazzar, who is the Phoenix King right after Anarion superseding Malekith, which kind of pisses off Malekith. It just depends on which part of the lore you're looking into, but those two things exist, and I wanted to present them. So what happens is, obviously we have the Sundering, right? And then subsequently after that, we have the War of Vengeance or the War of the Beard, depending on what side of the fence you fall on. I call it the War of the Beard because the High Elves are always right. Now, this obviously fractures the friendship and relationship between the dwarfs, because the War of the Beard starts because Malekith tricks the dwarfs into thinking that High Elves attack, raid, and killed multiple trade caravans of dwarfs. And the response by Gotrek Starkbreaker, the High King at the time of the War of Vengeance, says, hey, I think it's Phoenix King, Caldor the First might be, or maybe the second. But basically it says like, hey, yo, you got to do something about this. You've got to end this. Basically, what would eventually become the War of the Beard, and he ignores it, and this embroils out to, again, the War of the Beard, and their relationship ends. It depletes both races substantially. Like, the High Elves go from ruling all over in Lothern and ancient Bretonnia and ports and parts of what is now Altdorf to just being an Ulthuan. And the Karazankor goes from extending over to every single mountain range in the old world to just being in the World's Edge Mountains for the most part. So you see the kind of ramifications of this, and as the story goes, as the lore goes, this fracturing of this oath, this breaking of this oath, is so strong, because an oath on a deathbed is like the ultimate oath. Let's say penultimate oath outside of like Grungi's oath at the end of like the end times. So it's like, there it is. There's nothing more important than that in the dwarf culture, and the fracturing of this oath is said to bring Snorri Whitebeard's soul back from Dwarf Valhalla, basically, and imbues him as this mythological, mystical White Dwarf. And the White Dwarf is basically the Green Knight of the Karazankor, of dwarfdom. And he goes around the World's Edge Mountains kind of fighting and helping beleaguered dwarf armies here and there, and doing what he can to kind of help out. But it's always very mysterious. He doesn't talk very much. He disappears just as kind of mysteriously as he arrives, and just kind of comes in and out of the history. Now, for a lot of years in the hobby, the White Dwarf has always just kind of been this really cool figurehead. It's been on the covers of magazines. It's been whispered about. You've got some commemorative models that come out every so often. But Grombrindal's kind of birth in Total War Warhammer really kind of put the White Dwarf on the center stage. And also with the end times, you finally get who the hell the White Dwarf is. Now, up until this point, it was rumored that the White Dwarf was Snorri Whitebeard. In the end times, the White Dwarf is just like, it is I, Snorri Whitebeard. I have cast off my gray cloak like in Lord of the Rings 2 Towers, and drawn Malekith out like poison from a wound. And he sets out to go and kick Malekith's ass. Malekith is now the Eternity King here. He's assigned himself, well, bullshit from the lore has made him the Eternity King, meaning he's the overall king of all elfdom. And Snorri Whitebeard, or the White Dwarf, Grombrindal himself, Grombri, goes to go and, make him pay for breaking this grand oath. And it's kind of fucked up, but when he gets over to him, and they get in this big battle, and he was supposed to have killed him, like Grombrindal's like pretty much got him like dead to rights, and he goes, hey, forgive you. You want to go drink a beer about it? Like, it's kind of an overly weird, cheesy, lore-breaking moment, because the dwarfs don't just go, oh, well, we can forgive that oath. The oath has to be paid some way or another. So this is not kind of the way it should have ended, in my opinion. Grombrindal, if you're gonna make him attached to Malekith like that, then fucking have him go kill Malekith. Have him be Malekith's foil. But I guess on the note of foils, since we've got the White Dwarf and how he's really more of like a marketing, not ploy, but a marketing figure more than an actual tabletop figure. And he is part of the dwarf mythos, but he has had such a scant actual hardcore or concrete placement in it that it's hard to say that he's like a character as large as, say, Belagar, who's had a model for years, or Thorgrim, again, same thing. But the White Dwarf's kind of ultimate foil, his antithesis is the Black Agabo, and they kind of come and go all throughout the, almost like an episode of like Scooby-Doo, like running from door to door throughout the Games Workshop history. And the Black Agabo doesn't have a entry in anything of worth. Like, I think he's got some rules. He might have had a couple models or mentionings here or there, but there's mainly the White Dwarf that gets the big fanfare. He's got the majority. He's got a ton of different models and stuff like that. So Grombrindal is far and above more popular than the Black Gobbo as far as just the image. But that just kind of gives you guys an idea of what Grombrindal and what the White Dwarf's history is all about. And we've seen him now in Total War Warhammer. He kind of came with that really cool White Dwarf promotion, which was pretty nifty. But it added him into the game, and he added him with a lot of the same abilities and a lot of the same rules that we got with the White Dwarf number 348. Namely, really like all of his magic items. I mean, the Rune Helm of Zufbar, the Glimmeril skill armor, the Rune Cloak of Alya, Rune Axe of Grimnir. They're all pretty much in Total War Warhammer, especially maybe not in the multiplayer portion, but they are in the actual portion of the game. The what the hell is it called? The campaign. And it's kind of cool to see that, right? It's kind of cool to see that they make that direct translation. And in the actual lore for the White Dwarf and Grombrindal, he's assumed dead at the end of the end times, when he and the rest of the entirety of the dwarf race comes back to fill all the grudges, to kind of wipe out all grudges. He's actually made a debut though in the Age of Sigmar rule set, so he's actually still alive and kicking, which is weird. In fact, the dwarfs in Age of Sigmar comment saying, "I don't know how he's alive. He should be dead." So let's talk a little bit about his magic items here and what kind of makes Grombrindal. So he does have, he used to have a special rule called like Disguised, which basically meant that he almost was like an assassin, where he could be in any unit you the opponent didn't know, but you the dwarf player knew, and he could disguise in that unit, and then when he choose to reveal himself whenever he want. So it would prevent you from sniping out Grombrindal and kind of focusing that unit down. So it was kind of a really cool, interesting, and flavorful kind of touch, because Grombrindal always kind of comes in and out of the lore in a cloaked, kind of concealed manner before disappearing just as easily, like I was saying. So obviously that didn't make it into the game, because he's a up front and center kind of lord, but I think it'd have been kind of cool to see that kind of cloaked mechanics, and that's like the assassin mechanic. But we don't even see the assassin mechanic from the rest of the tabletop in Total War, so it makes a lot of sense. But he is unbreakable, just like he is in Total War Warhammer. But let's talk a little bit about his magic items. Now, he has the Rune Helm of Zufbar, and this is from White Dwarf 348. Those dwarfs who have managed to glimpse the stunning helmet that the White Dwarf bears in battle on his furrowed brow have described it as a contemplating, dazzling vision. The runesmiths have identified this magnificent helmet as the lost Rune Helm of Zufbar, which disappeared many years ago when that particular hold was temporarily overrun by Greens. Now, the flavor text is kind of similar, right? Long thought lost to time and conflict, Grombrindal's awesome helm inspires already courageous dwarfen hearts to even greater acts of bravery. And this gives him armor, some physical resistance, and helps him intercept in the world routes, but also increases leadership. And that's what it was in tabletop, was the ability to help out any fleeing dwarf, helps out their leadership. So it's a very nice little nod to that item, and I'm all for it. But let's touch on the Cloak of Bullaiah here. The Rune Cloak of Alya. The runes embroidered on the great cloak worn by the White Dwarf display, without a doubt, that it was woven by Bullaiah herself. Just as a side note, we know Bullaiah to be the master, the mistress of runes, and brought rune crafting and enchantment to the dwarves. But to continue on, at least one saga relates that Bullaiah, the dwarf goddess and protector of the dwarven people, fell in love with the White Dwarf on account of his magnificent white beard, and gave him the cloak as a token of her esteem. Now, this obviously doesn't match up with what we know from the lore of him being Snorri Whitebeard, but this is of a time when things were very tumultuous, and it transitioned from rich, true, awesome lore to what sells the most. That's just like a purely super opinionated opinion of what happened in Games Workshop. It's very much swung back to really cool, rich, pure lore. So it was a very weird time in Games Workshop history where things didn't make a lot of sense. A lot of retconning was going on, and it's since jumped back from then. But the Rune Cloak of Bullaiah in tabletop pretty much just gave him magic resistance. Really simple little cloak here. What it does here in Total War Warhammer does the same thing. Gives him some melee defense of 6, some physical resistance of 5, and it helps with some untainted and enemy hero actions, but it gives him a 25% magic resistance. Again, staying very true to the lore, very true to how his tabletop interpretation was. Now the Rune Axe of Grombrindal is pretty interesting because it's actually called the Rune Axe of Grimnir in the tabletop. So the mighty axe-wielding White Dwarf carries an axe that matches the description of the Grimnir's ancient runic axe that appears in several sagas and legends. Perhaps Grimnir gave his legendary weapon to the White Dwarf. And in in Total War, mentioned in several sagas and legends, could the White Dwarf's mighty weapon be the fabled rune axe wielded by Grimnir at the dawn of history? So it's like they're trying to say it is, but it isn't the Rune Axe of Grimnir by naming it the Rune Axe of Grombrindal, kind of making some mystery to it. So it's kind of fun. A different way of doing things. It's essentially the same damn thing, right? The way that this worked in tabletop was that when you used it, you were stronger, you hit harder basically, and you were able to re-roll any failed to hit and to wound rolls, which is pretty huge. And anytime you basically, like we've talked about before in tabletop, when you attack someone, you roll to hit them, then you roll to see if that hit wounds them, then the opponent rolls an armor save to see if they've saved themselves from that wound. Now, the Rune Axe of Grimnir makes it so that you have to re-roll successful armor saves, which is very, very strong actually. So you're pretty much you get to re-roll the hit, the wound, and then if they succeed on saving it, they have to re-roll that. So your likelihood of breaking through their armor is way stronger with the Rune Axe of Grimnir. And the way we see this in Total War Warhammer, it's kind of similar, right? You get this increase to AP damage plus 13, increase to melee attack, which is your likelihood to hit, enables magical attacks. It has a lot of really cool, nice campaign abilities like upkeep and recruitment costs and income bonuses, but also clicking it, activating it, gives you plus 40% AP damage. Now, if we're looking at his base stats, he's got 315 AP, 40%, whatever, 3 times 4, so 120 additional AP damage. So that's pretty rad. And also it imbues Discourage, so it knocks down the leadership of things. So if you're fighting against Greenskins, which is kind of the namesake of Grombrindal, is fighting against Greenskins, it helps to really knock those lords out of commission real fast and heavy like. But the last item here, the Armor of Glimril Scales. This one's got a different description. So than Total War. After the Battle of Throg, in which the White Dwarf slew 10,000 warriors of chaos to rescue the reckless Ungi No Chance and his folk, a single scale of armor was found clenched in the teeth of the Chaos Lord. It was forged from a metal totally unknown by the dwarf folk. Runesmiths were completely mystified and called it Glimril, believing that it had been forged by the ancestor gods themselves. So very weird, very mysterious, very pompous. The Glimril scale, though, just simply gives him a 1-up armor save and 4+ ward save. We see this, though, represented in Total War Warhammer. It's got like I said, different description. So here's a description in Total War. Replicated by runesmiths from a single scale wedged between the teeth of a slain Chaos Lord at the pivotal Battle of Throg, the White Dwarf's armor is able to deflect even the hardest blows. So I totally lied. That's almost the exact same description. I think I was thinking of the Rune Axe when I was looking at this earlier. So, completely full of shit. Ignore what I've said. But it has the same kind of representation. Increases armor, increases melee defense, increases physical resistance, as well as giving a ward save of 10%. Also helps out with some campaign benefits such as enemy hero action success chance and wound recovery time. So, do I think that the Total War representation of the White Dwarf is on point? Yes. In fact, I think it kind of rises above the expectation. Usually there's some things that are kind of sacrificed to make a really true conversion, but I think that this is a very true to form conversion outside of maybe the disguised portion, but losing that isn't anything I would say is too huge. I really wish that there was some sort of event or mechanic in Mortal Empires that catered to Malekith or pointed towards Malekith, especially if you started with some sort of oath or grudge immediately towards the Dark Elves. I think that'd be really cool and thematic. But outside of that, I think that this kind of representation of Grombrindal and this portrayal of him is a nice portrayal that is that kind of keeps the mystery of who the White Dwarf is, keeps the mystery of who Grombrindal is, but that brings to the fore a lot of the great things that make him who he is. I hope that you guys enjoyed this little video here today on Grombrindal, on the White Dwarf. If you have any other questions or anything else you want to hear about from Grombri himself or the White Dwarf, do let me know and I can get those answered for you. But as always, guys, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, all that action. Have a good one and take care.